So, yeah. So next up we have Gaurav Sood, and Gaurav is API and Web Strategy Manager at Equifax. Gaurav combines commercial strategy and product management to manage roadmaps and shape the ANZ API program with Equifax. The title of the presentation today is going to be ANZ API Program Governance and Strategy, including Innovation Hacks. So please give a warm welcome to Gaurav.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do I have to click? Oh, here we go. Hey, everyone. I'm going to make it a little interactive and get to know you as well. Firstly, it's such a pleasure to be here. I was here 4 years ago as a first-timer at API Days, and I'm back as a speaker. So it's really exciting to be here, sharing some insights and being in the API space with you. Hopefully make it really some good takeaways for you if you're managing API programs and trying to drive the strategy within your company. So I'd like to ask, who here is from the business or product management or governance side of APIs? If you could put your hand up. OK, we've got a couple of people. And is everyone else an engineer? If so, put your hand up. Engineer, technology leaders. Awesome, that's great. Who's at API Days for the first time? Oh, that's great. Awesome. Well, welcome. And it's such a pleasure to be here with you all because it's been such a long time since being in person. So wonderful to present in person rather than online. I'm going to cover a couple of different areas. This is a longer presentation, so I'll try and go into it at some level of speed. But it should give you a summary of how I look at APIs in Equifax and the context of the space, as well as how we're trying to do API-first thinking in this large transformation. So for my tech guys, that's my X term. I've been in product for a long time. I was an engineer before. And you can also get in touch with me and follow my blog, which is all about product or culture and strategy. I'd like to just mention our partners. Some of them are here. We've done some great work with them. And so some of the work and thinking has been by working with these really great partners. We're moving fully to Google Cloud in Equifax and leveraging a lot of these new platforms as we do our digital transformation. So Equifax is no small beast. It's a rather large company with nearly $5 billion in revenue, working across the globe. We have more than one line of business with nearly 50 APIs in production right now through our CA Gateway platform, which is all SOAP-based. And the idea is to move it to the cloud with RESTful APIs over the next few years. We've already started that adventure. So in doing so, I want to give you kind of a sense of the landscape of how do you shape this when it's such a complex, multi-region, multi-product, multi-business. And maybe some people are nodding, saying, yep, maybe you're in the same kind of boat and might take away a few important things from here. So globally, we've already launched a lot of APIs, and we classify them into internal, public, and private. And internal, partner, and public, sorry. And those partner APIs are not exposed, so you have to get a code and partner with Equifax to try and use those APIs. But it's even showing you the scale of the work you need to do within a large company to start to build the muscle to build out your transformation. So as we do this, what is it that is really, really important as we build out the APIs? And one thing that we've tried to do through the API programs is to really think about the user journey first, rather than, so it's the design-first approach to APIs as you build out that capability. And why is that important? Because it's more than just the transfer of the state of an object. It's about understanding what is the user journey as they go through and use that product. So if you're using the Uber app to get here from Melbourne Airport this morning, there was a certain interaction flow that led you to book successfully, find the cab, and for it to arrive. But that's through an orchestration often a number of different APIs together to create that digital experience, which is key for your business. So if you don't start with that API journey in mind, the journey in mind, you often end up boxing the API to data. And that often happens in some teams which are going through that process of rethinking their strategy, their APIs. Because the other alternative is to start coding, and you get locked into what was understood as potentially your way of making that product. But it could be, without the right discovery, you're locking into your current known landscape of what the customer needs are, and that's not robust, it's not agile, and you won't be able to accelerate your development to meet the needs that you may not have discovered. So there's always the unknowns which will arise as you start to do that development work. That's a critical point of how do you create that value versus locking into the code base that you think that you need right now. So as we start to build out API platforms and products, that recomposition capability through design experience is really important. And this leads us to having thanks to Postman for this wonderful image, but leads us to having this ability to create the right API for the right customer at the right point through the right channel. And that's a really critical part of your API-first program and your design-first principles of building out APIs for the customer, for that experience. Now, why is this important? We all want to get our bonuses. Yeah? Want to make some money? Can I ask you a personal question? How many of you own a barista Breville machine at home? Yeah, a couple. Who has a pair of R.M. Williams boots? Good, you get a couple of takers. So we do like our premium experiences and products, right? We're willing to pay a premium for it. Now, just use the same metaphor. If you've done a great job in designing your API, you can charge a premium for it, And this is where, coming back to your business strategy, is why not make that experience unbeatable, the best you can, competitive, and differentiated so that you can charge that premium for your product. Now, an example of this is where you started with this great experience and journey in mind, and instead of selling the API itself, you can sell the entire SDK to your products, to your customers, which enable them to create an orchestration which is highly coupled and very well suits their needs versus bespoke custom development. And when you do that, you've created a landscape within which your customers can integrate in as they need to. And this is just an example from Algolia, which also enables you to do orchestration within their custom workflows. So who wants to get up and reset indexes manually when you can do it through this amazing orchestration capability? And as we build our web products, you don't necessarily need to sell the web product. You can sell those SDKs. So what are we doing to do this? And what's something I would share with you, which you should be doing if you're not already, is thinking about, through your API lifecycle, embedding the idea of experimentation and beta programs. And this beta program idea, it comes with the ability of having the confidence to go out and talk to your customers, get out of the office, put on a jacket, and pound the pavements and go and speak to your customers and find out what do they really want. And as you do that, what you want to do in your beta program is really sell the value before you start building. Sell that product before you commit to the code. Pick your early adopters so that through your fast iteration cycles what's going to be the biggest bang for buck, because that's where often your programs will fail. If you haven't started to do that, you haven't picked your early adopters, you haven't identified who are the laggards, you haven't identified what are the key value propositions, you will end up having built a product that no one wants, and no one wants that, right? So as you build out that early validation of those use cases, think about that data, the partnerships you might need to go to market with, your pricing. And we will talk about carrots and sticks later, but in migration, but it really gives you a sense of, are we going to be successful? Are we going to invest in the highest ROI? Or are there some critical risk factors which we may not have incorporated into our strategy? And this beta program is a really great way of validating that. And yeah, never do big bang, obviously. So what have we done in this large-scale transformation? You saw that big map. What we've done in Equifax is to create regional centers of excellence, where the centers of excellence have a real capability to enable all the different product teams. As I said, we've got 40+ APIs in production, different business units, and they're also building new APIs. So we've got to we go through a very well-structured process with nearly 30 steps, it's a bit less, of defining how to build out the API product, validate it, make sure it meets our security standards, architecture standards, CI/CD, capability to build out the API. We've done a really great job of involving the data governance team early in making sure that our representational state, our logical architecture is well thought through so that there's a repeatability and a consistency to the data that we provide so that it can be reused internally, but also understood by customers regardless of the customer segment. So it's not just about the process, it's also about those standards and patterns which we are working on to make sure that as we build out new capability, it's reusable. And that's really key to building out a core API program, whatever the size of your company. So what were some success factors as we built out innovation capability? One of them is selling to executives. There's always limited budget, there's limited time, and you want to make sure you hit your milestones. And you need the buy-in of executives to run programs, right? So what we did really critically was to ask ourselves, would the executive buy this? Would they pay for what we want to do? So sometimes being an innovation protagonist in your company means, standing up and asking for money and endorsement and support. And just ask yourself, are you pitching to them like you would if you were selling something? And that's what we ended up doing that very well. We crafted a really great value proposition to our executives to say, we want to do this innovation day. It's going to create this bang for buck. It's going to create this amount of knowledge across about 40 or 50 squads. We had a really great tailored example of building an API, which was relevant to Equifax. We personalized the value propositions by product managers, by engineers, by architects. And we got everyone involved. And of course, we built out some great swag. And we had great prizes, and it was a real success. So we got David here in the crowd. So David helped to execute that. Thank you, David, publicly again. Yeah, that was a great program. So we had so many developers, so many product managers, so many people interested in this day. It was a resounding success and really exciting to deliver something like that at scale. Not easy, but it was worth the effort. So as we start to think about APIs, and wow, there's this whole thing about, you build it and that's it, right? It's easy, it's finished. No, there's a life cycle. Unfortunately, you have to manage them throughout the life cycle and sunset some of them and migrate customers. And that's hard. It's not easy to migrate customers who might be really locked in to your API. What are you going to do? So we've got to think about a couple of principles, and you may have very different ones to what we had. We started to think about what's the lowest customer effort for migration while maximizing our investment, right? And we asked ourselves, do we have a burning platform? And there's something you need to ask yourself is, do you really need to do the migration? Or do you need to think about sustaining that platform? What are the optionality that you could use to think about your migration principles? Because not all the time do you need to migrate. You might just need to lose a customer or sunset the product if it's not a lot of revenue. It's important to start to think about, as you did at the beta program, to think about your customer segments at the same point in time. And why is that? Because some of the larger customers would have different budgets and timeframes to smaller customers again. Their timelines would have changed, their priorities would have changed. And what we started to do was think about the scenario planning in the investment across the short-term scenarios and the longer-term scenarios. what would be the easiest migration pathway? Importantly, here's your versioning strategy, your minor and major versioning strategies, so that you don't create more and more impact for your customers. And then, I guess separating innovation from your legacy, really starting to think about where you're starting to put that money, and how does your innovation look, feel differently to what you've done as a previous product, previous experience. Now, there's always a governance aspect, and in doing this governance, we think about how do you empower your governance teams to be, your governance team and your migration team to have the right empowerment. And that's really key, because if they have the empowerment, they can make decisions at speed. And that's about giving them that clear ownership of the right decisions with the right criteria and the right abilities to make real-time changes, potentially to weights on the discounting of prices or the amount of cost that you can subsidize, the way that you would work with certain partners to accelerate innovation or migration. And a couple of things around this was we're crafting is, the way to manage your metrics around your migrations as well. So just having really clear process and principles around your metrics to do your migrations. So lastly, in ending, as you start to think about your programs, what's really important that we've found is having really clear, early, and consistent developer evangelism. It's known that developer evangelists need to exist. I think we need to see more and more of that in Australia, in that ecosystem. People coming out, speaking, engaging with the developer partners. I think it's a really new category, a job which didn't exist 10 years ago. I'll take it if you're hiring. No, just kidding. And improving that developer experience through thinking about features which really accelerate the development process. So if it's a downloadable SDK in multiple languages, just think about the coordination burden you've just reduced by creating those capabilities right on your web portal. Another product, another way of thinking about product is about your documentation as a product, right? So if it's clear, consistent, well thought through, you don't need to explain it as much to your partners. And that's really critical as you start to build out your APIs. It's not just about the code, it's also the documentation. If you leave that unwritten and forgotten, it will come back to bite you. And unfortunately, then your core developers with that key subject matter knowledge will be in front of your partners talking about, well, this is what this means, So don't underinvest in documentation. Just okay. So yeah, the last two things would be just making sure you have great metrics on your successes and investing in B2B marketing, and that's something which is happening more and more, and I think we'll see much more of that in the Australian ecosystem. Questions? Thank you. That was on time.
Do we have any questions? Over here on the left.
So what are you weighing on between should the design and the experience be how to define your APIs, or should it rather be domain? Because otherwise, you're going to be ending up with a studio of APIs if you're designing something for an experience. But at the same time, if you're limiting it by the kind of product you want to put out there, how many experiences can be supported? So what is the right place where you say, this is my right point?
Yeah, it's a good question because, once you go back to design, the first thing you're thinking about is what's the customer, what's the user, what segment, and what are the key journeys that you want to design for, right? And that's where it's really critical that you have had that conversation and you've segmented enough value so that you're not designing for everyone at the get-go, because you'll know which ones will be important now versus next and later, right? So that road mapping is really critical. And then once you start that process as well, you'll know which domains, like, you're thinking about microservices here or like domain separation potentially. That becomes more clear as you start on the journey, but you need to start with those segments really upfront. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Gaurav. You've mentioned migrating your existing customers to the new APIs. How do you motivate them? Is it a carrot or a stick or a combination?
I think my view is that you need to build something which is much better than what you have now to motivate customers. And the carrot is that, like if you go from a service which is up, say 95%, but has scheduled downtimes, right? It's got scheduled downtimes. What's the experience we have now as digital consumers? It's the always-on experience. It's the immediate experience, right? Now, if you're a service provider at a global scale, what you got to think about is, well, your customers are global, and your users of those customers are global, and they expect 24/7 availability. What does that mean in revenue terms, right? And so what we want to do is have that 24/7 availability, and that should translate like AWS does or other cloud providers do of reducing the cost per call on your API. But overall volume goes up. So I think that benefit is really critical as you craft out that experience. And once you can show that trade-off that, hey, well, this is the legacy experience, but this is the new experience, and this is how much revenue translates to you, that's really critical. The second part of that question is, like besides the availability dynamic, is how much better is that? Is it just a standard $50 boot, or is it an RM William which will last you 10 years, right? How much better does that coffee taste? How much better is that API experience? How much better is it from a maintainability point of view? And once you craft the developer experience, there isn't that hesitancy to go and buy that product and use that product and integrate that product. And that migration pathway becomes seamless as well, right? So I think I don't want to use sticks, because there's no point if you're investing in the right principles and the right product design. Yeah, that's how I look at it. Thanks.
Another question over on our right.
Just a question about API first design. How much back and forward do you do with your customers? And when you get customers with competing ideas, how do you handle that?
When you have customers with competing ideas?
Yeah, with I want the API to do this, and the other one says I want something different.
Mm-hmm.
How do you competing ideas from your customers?
So, okay, so in most organizations that are starting on a new product development, right, what you often need is the ability to have a innovation mindset, right? And that's someone said that. But how I look at that innovation mindset is, if you look at the categories of customers and their jobs to be done, right, at a high level, once you start to size the actual benefit of that to the customer and the size of that customer segment, you need to start categorizing or grouping the jobs by the segment and the value. When you do that, you start to get a much clearer picture of, is this something that is going to be more valuable to these bigger customers, or is it smaller or more smaller customers who are willing to pay? The problem is, the big customers will pay you, but it'll take you a long time to build a really enterprise-built, validated product to sell to them. So do you want to do 3 years of development to get there, or do you want to build something which you can test, build, iterate, and refine, get early validation and revenue before you go up to that Westpac or Telstra or, So that's a key product management decision. And yes, it takes time, and you need to keep iterating on it. It's not easy, and that research process is where I think really good engineers, really good product people, really good innovators are able to craft that conversation. And how do you do it with the big customers who want it now? Well, you sell them on the journey, right? You sell them on, we're going to get there, we need to do A, B, C, D, E. validate it, and get there with you, and make sure they're engaged on that journey. But the early product people also doing the sales process through that. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, cool.
Fantastic. I think that's all the time we have for this. So thank you once again to Gaurav for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.